Hello and welcome, this is Cheryl. Thank you so much for joining me today. In this video, I'm sharing interactive arcade birthday cards using the Arcade Machine Builder die set from Trinity Stamps. This is intended to be used with the window box card die set that they have. I don't have that, so I'm going to be sharing how I use it without that. I'm also using the 8-bit birthday stamp and coordinating die set, as well as the 8-bit alphabet stamp and die set. Then for a little bit of sparkle, I'm using the Bubblegum sparkle stars as well as the electric sparkle stars. Now this is a collab between Trinity Stamps as well as Pear Blossom Press, so that's why these cards are all going to be interactive and they're all going to be a little bit different. The first card is going to be a shaker card, but before we get to the shaker bit, I'm going to assemble the other pieces. So for this card, my machine or my arcade game is with Raven cardstock, and then I have some details in Cosmic Sky cardstock as well as some bright green peridot cardstock. I tried to keep with some of the bright bold colors on arcade games. These were the closest colors in my opinion to those. So for the little box parts on the bottom, I'm using mirror cardstock from Pear Blossom Press. It die cuts nice and easily, so it's perfect for little metallic parts on these machines. I'm also using that mirror cardstock on my last card. It has a really cool feature that if you put a light behind it, it shines through it. So I'm using it for my last card as well, using that feature. For the next part here, this is the part where all of the buttons and levers and doodads go. I did that with Raven cardstock as well as Cosmic Sky cardstock. For this part here, this is the upper part of that arcade game. So that is with Raven cardstock. The outline here is with Cosmic Sky cardstock. And then I'm going to put the peridot cardstock in there. So we've got a nice bright area. Now, obviously you can do these with whatever color cardstock you want. I just really liked the black or gray for the base of the machine with those bright colors on top. I always love blacks with bright bold colors, so that's what I chose here. I die cut the word arcade out of 2x2 cardstock, but you could also use some of the sentiments from the 8-bit birthday stamp set. There's a couple that have a curve to them, and then there's some that are straight, but you could curve them on that piece if you wanted to stamp part of the sentiment on that instead. That would work. To make it a little bit easier for putting these letters down, I'm using some reverse tweezers. It just makes it easy to hold that letter, put the adhesive on the back, and then place it where I want it to go. For my shaker box, I have 7 of these screen frames die cut out of Raven cardstock. I'm going to layer them on top of each other. I have 6 that I'm layering on top of each other. The 7th one is going to go on the front, right above the die cut window sheet for the front of my arcade game. Now I chose to die cut these out of black cardstock and just layer them together to create the walls for my shaker. You could use foam adhesive around the outside edges, but some of these areas are really quite thin. So this is the best way to get a perfect screen or a perfect look because all of these pieces are the same. Now for this window here, it's created with 2 different die sets. I used some Best Ever Craft tape in order to tape those die cuts together or those dies together. Then I used a little bit of embossing powder tool on the back of that tape so it wasn't going to stick to my cardstock. And this made it super easy to cut multiples of that same shape to create this shaker box. Then we have the buttons and knobs for the top of the machine. Now those 2 on the right, I die cut out of that mirror cardstock. The rest are out of different colors of cardstock. These are all part of one die, so you do have to use the same die to cut multiple colors so that your buttons are all different colors. Really not too easy to use. The die is small enough that you can use scrap bits of paper or cardstock for it, and they come together really quick and easily. Once again, using those reverse tweezers make it easy to put those pieces together because you can hold the teeny tiny die cuts, add the glue to the back, and then place them on top of where they're supposed to go. Now the tiniest ones there are the base for our little levers with the knobs on them. So I'm going to add a little bit of glue, put those to the side, and let those dry. Now because that's mirror cardstock, it is going to take a little bit longer to dry because it's non-porous. It will dry totally fine, but you do want to give it just a little bit more time. For this first one, I assembled them off the card. For the other ones, I just assemble them right on the card, making it a little bit easier to wait for it to dry. So I have one more frame here and I have a die cut window sheet for the front of my shaker box. I'm going to glue those together and then I'm going to glue them to the stack of frames that I've created. I'm going to let that dry. Once again, because we're gluing it to the window sheet, that's non-porous. It's going to take just a little bit longer. So I want to give that some time to dry while I'm creating the inside part of the window screen. So I have my 8-bit birthday birthday stamp set here, I'm going to use a white eraser on the stamping surface. I'm doing the entire stamp set all at one time. That way it removes any possible manufacturing residue that's on the stamp. Then I use a brush to remove any eraser bits. This only needs to be done one time, so I typically will do it the first time I use any stamp in a set. I'll just do the entire set and it's totally done, ready to go for the next time I want to use the stamp set. I'm using my MISTI tool to help stamp them because then I can stamp it multiple times, making sure that I have a nice, crisp, clean stamping of those sentiments. You can see how many different choices there are. There's a bunch of single words that you can put together to create little phrases, which I think is so cute for this. And I love the options. The fact that you can create so many different ones is so fun. I am keeping these sentiments towards the top of my screen here because I am going to be using the Bubblegum and Electric Sparkle Stars for my shaker bits. Those are all going to kind of go towards the bottom of my shaker box. So I want to be able to see most of my sentiment without having to shake it. I will get a little bit that it's covering that bottom word there, but I want to be able to see most of it. So that's why my sentiment is more towards the top so that I can see a lot of that. And those stars are a little bit transparent, so you'll see that there's something underneath them anyways. I stamped those multiple times using some black Memento ink. And then because it's dye-based ink, I just cleaned my stamp off with a damp microfiber cloth, making it really easy to take that ink off. So now that I have my back of my screen as well as the upper part of my shaker box, I'm going to pour a little bit of each of those colors of stars on that piece there. I'm going to use my fingers to just kind of spread them out a little bit, but I am keeping them away from the outside edges. I want to be able to glue my screen part, the top of my shaker box, on top of them, and I want to make sure that I don't have any of those shaker bits stuck underneath that glue. But I want to also make sure that I don't have a mound in the middle so that I'm creating a clump there. I want to make sure that they're all nice and separated. So once I've done that, I can put the liquid glue on the back of my shaker box. When I'm gluing these together, I'm making sure that there's a continuous line of glue all the way around. I want to make sure there's no openings or anything that shaker pieces could slip out. Then I'm going to let that completely dry. And here's my shaker box all done. I love those two colors together. They're just nice and bright. You can use any shaker bits you want, but those stars are really cute because they're nice and sparkly. I have a piece of anchor cardstock here that is 3 inches by 5.5 inches. I will be cutting some off of the top later on, but I'm going to wait until I have my arcade game together before doing that. So I'm starting at the bottom and I'm working my way up building that arcade game. So I have that base put on there and pressing it down. There was a dot of ink that I smudged. I'm going to be using a sand eraser in order to remove that. The next part of my arcade game, I wanted it to pop out a little bit more. So I used some foam adhesive on the back of that so it pops out and it has some natural dimension to it. I just cut those into smaller strips so that they would fit on that piece. Then we can glue our shaker box down and the pieces glue together really quite easily. Now there is a little bit of extra space beside my screen here that it's a little bit, that screen itself is narrower than the 3 inches. You can, if you want, take some detailed scissors and cut that piece out if that's bothering you. It didn't bother me, so I left it as is, but if you want, you can easily trim that piece out because it's nice and the lines are quite easy to follow. Once I have that top part down, I'm letting it dry for a few moments, and while that's drying, I'm putting my buttons on the front ledge of the arcade game. I'm taking my glue, putting it right on that ledge, and then just placing those buttons in there. You could also use those reverse tweezers to hold those pieces, put the glue on the back, and then place them if you wanted. By using that liquid glue, it just makes it really easy to move and shimmy those things in place. I had a little bit of glue excess on that left knob there, so I just took my reverse tweezers and just kind of scraped it up to remove it. Then I put a little bit of glue behind those knobs as well so they were nice and adhered to the front of the shaker box. Last step is to remove that top curve on top of the machine. Then we can put some glue on the back, and I'm just putting it onto a plain A2 card base. I want that arcade game to be the focal point. You could use color behind it if you wanted, but again, there's so much dimension to that game as well as the nice bright colors. So I just wanted it to pop out of that card and not have any distraction from the card base. For a little bit of extra sparkle to tie in with those sparkle stars in the shaker box, I'm using some stickles. This is just an opalescent iridescent one, so we're going to be able to easily see the cardstock underneath there. It's just adding some dimension, some sparkle, something to catch the eye, and just a little bit more texture. So once I have that done, I can let that completely dry, and we can see those sparkle stars shake really nicely on the inside of the box or inside of the screen. I kept my screen white because I wanted to make sure that you could easily see that sentiment, but you could also do it in a different color if you want. So for my next card, I changed up the arcade game colors just a little bit. The base of the machine is Cosmic Sky. I'm going to work on my sentiment part first. For this one, the interactive element is going to be on a mini action wobbler. I'm keeping the rest of the game not interactive, but I thought it would be fun to use the birthday cake in the 8-bit birthday stamp and die set and have that on a mini action wobbler. So for this one, I have my screen here. I'm placing my sentiment, part of it on the top, part of it towards the bottom, so I have room for that cake in the middle. I'm once again using that Misty stamping tool. I'm stamping it again with that black Memento ink. I'm going to add some colors to that cake itself. I left this sentiments here black, but obviously you could also change the color of those if you wanted them to be bright colors as well. So once I have that stamped on there, I can clean off my stamp set, put it away, and then we can create the cake part. So I'm going to stamp it on a scrap piece of paper using that Memento ink again, and then I'm going to color that cake with Copic markers. Really, the areas are small enough. You can color them with whatever you want. If you want to do dye-based markers, that would absolutely work as well. I'm going to add some stickles at the end, and I've chose the alcohol-based markers because when I add stickles on top of it, those colors don't blend and bleed on the alcohol-based markers. If you're using dye-based markers, there's a chance that they will, and especially with pinks, the color changes a little bit. So by using the alcohol-based markers, I know that that's not going to happen. Once I have my cake stamped, I can use the coordinating die and cut it out. I like to tape that die in place just to make sure it's not going to move on me, and I want to make sure that die stays in place. Once I have that cut out, I can use those Copic markers to color it. I'm just choosing colors that are nice and bright and vibrant. I have RV06 there, that was the pink. The yellow is Y06, the blue is B24, and the green is YG23. I just chose colors that coordinated with the colors that I was creating the rest of these, or all of these cards with. It doesn't really matter what colors you choose. The areas are small enough that I didn't do any shading because you wouldn't really see it anyways because they're really quite tiny. I can set that to the side and we can start assembling our arcade game here. So there are a bunch of pieces that I pre-assembled because it's exactly the same as the first card, just different colors here. So we have the base of the machine, the screen of the machine. I put the window sheet on the frame first, so that was done off screen. So once I had stamped my sentiment on the back of that screen, I could just glue that to the front of it. Just like the first card, I'm adding some foam adhesive to this front ledge here. I want to make sure that that's popped out. I just really liked the look of that. Then we can add the screen to the top, and then we can add the top arcade banner to the top of the machine there. And that as well is also pre-assembled, as well as the buttons. The assembly is exactly the same as the first card, so I didn't think we needed to do multiples of these. Now I chose to keep the three machines in the similar color tones, just changing different things up a bit. Obviously you can change up the colors totally. If you have neon cardstock, I think it would be fantastic for using with this. Even glitter cardstock for some of the pieces I think would be really, really fun. I chose to keep most of them plain cardstock other than my window sheets and the mirror sheets. And I really like the contrast with the shine of the screen and the shine on the mirror sheets. So once those buttons are glued down, I can cut the top arch off of the arcade, and then we can start to assemble our card. So once again, I'm just going to use a plain A2 card base. Now you could even take this card and just change it to a really slim card and just kind of have just the arcade game as that as well. I think that would be fun too, rather than having it on a traditional A2 card base. In that case, I would just trim the 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch card to 3 inches wide, and then maybe just put it a little bit shorter so that you didn't see the white card base on top of the machine or below the machine. But again, I kept the focal point on the arcade machine itself, and I just kept the card base really, really plain and bare. By having that traditional card base, you have an opening or an inside of the card where you can add a sentiment. Then I'm going to take the mini action wobble and put it on the back of my cake here. These fold nice and flat and they spring up. You can also kind of flick them if you want them to kind of move back and forth. So they're just a fun interactive element. They're super easy to use. There's adhesive on both sides of them. You just peel off the adhesive, put it on your die cut or stamped element, and then put it on the base. Again, it goes totally flat, perfect for cards because you don't have anything sticking out. Then I'm going to add the stickles to the cake pieces. I also added a little bit of detail to the word arcade at the top of the machine with that RV06 Copic marker, as well as that front part. Just adding a little bit of shading, a little bit of extra detail. You could also do ink blending here too. I just thought I had the Copic markers out and I wanted to see how it was going to look. I added the stickles to that arcade word there. I just love the extra texture and the sparkle that it gives them. Now I wanted to add a little bit of glossy shine to those flames, so I just used a little bit of glossy accents for that. And I also used those stickles on some of the cake icing pieces. I'm going to let that completely dry, but while it was drying, I thought it would be fun to add extra detail to the arcade machine using the electric sparkles stars. You could use some of the bubblegum as well, but because we have a lot of pink on this machine, I thought the electric ones would be perfect for it. I love that they're sparkly as well, so it just adds a really fun element to it. So I'm going to put them on the front of the machine. I just use my glue bottle to put dots of glue. Then I use my wax tool to add or to pick up those pieces, placing them exactly where I wanted them to go so that I'm not using my fingers with those little pieces there. Then I added a few to the screen as well, just to coordinate throughout that machine. I really love the look of these. I think they're so pretty and just nice and vibrant, perfect for the arcade theme here. So once I have these done, again, those are going to take a little bit longer to dry because we have a non-porous item that we're gluing to a non-porous surface. So just give it a little bit of time to dry, but we're already waiting for those stickles to dry anyways. But this is the finished product. I'm going to set it aside to completely dry while we're working on our last card. So for this one, I did the machine pieces out of Anchor cardstock. I wanted to have a little bit of a galaxy look to the screen. So I'm taking some Distress inks. This is Twisted Citron. Then I have some Salty Ocean and just going to kind of create a really quick distress galaxy looking background. So that was Wilted Violet there. I'm going to do the Salty Ocean around the outside edges, and then I'm going to add a little bit of black soot around the outside edges. I have done a galaxy background on my cards regularly, so this is kind of a smaller version of it. I'm going to be using some of the pieces from the 8-bit alphabet die set with the space game. I'm going to do the rocket ship as well as a couple of the stars with that mirrored cardstock. This card is going to be a light up card, but it's also going to be a shadow box card. So we're going to have two kind of interactive elements in one here. But I thought with that space theme, having a galaxy background would be perfect for it. So we have the 8-bit alphabet stamp and die set here. Just like the birthday die set, I'm going to use that white eraser on the stamping surface. I'm just going to go over it, making sure to brush off any possible eraser bits. These stamps are quite tiny, so you might have the pressure of that eraser kind of taking them off of that carrier sheet. So if that happens, just put them back on. It's easy enough to do. Then I'm taking the scrap piece of my mirror sheets, putting it in my Misty stamping tool. Now, because we're stamping onto a mirror sheet here, I want to use some permanent ink. So I'm going to be using some black StazOn so that is going to work perfectly on the mirror sheet. I'm also going to use the black StazOn to stamp on my window sheet. If you use a dye-based ink here, it's just going to rub off. It's never going to dry. So you want to make sure that you have an ink that you can use on a non-porous surface. Now, because we're using black StazOn ink, we need to use a special cleaner to clean it off the stamp. So I'm using some Ultra Clean. It works really, really easily, but you want to make sure to take the StazOn off of that clear stamp because if you leave it and store it with that on there, it will start to break down that stamp. So make sure that you clean it off right away. So once we have the stars and the rocket ship stamped, I'm going to set that aside to dry. It's going to take a few seconds for that to dry. We want to make sure that that's dry before we die cut it. While that's happening, I'm using a couple of the sentiment stamps from the 8-bit birthday stamp set to stamp on my window sheet for the front of my window, for the front of my game here. Once again, using that black StazOn because again, we're working on a non-porous surface here. We need to use an ink that is going to dry on there. After that is stamped there, I'm going to use that Ultra Clean to clean my stamps off and then put them away. Let that window sheet completely dry before we start to assemble our card. Now the dies from the alphabet die set are all stuck together. So off screen, I used some die snips in order to snip those apart. I only needed to use 3 dies, so we didn't need to use all of them at once. Once that is done, I can tape those dies in place to make sure that they're going to stay exactly where I want them to be while I'm die cutting. I'm just doing 3 pieces here, because I'm using some easy lights, they have 3 lights to them, so I want 3 areas for those lights to shine. You could do more if you wanted, but there's not more than 3 lights on the easy light, so I wanted to only have pieces that were going to light up from behind. Once I have those, I set those to the side and we're ready to start assembling our game. We need to partially assemble this before we can assemble or we can add our lights to it. I want to make sure that they're placed properly on that background there. Now, to add just a little bit of dimension to the screen here, I have 3 of those frames die cut. Then I'm going to glue my top of my window onto those 2 frames there. Then I'm going to take that 3rd frame and glue it on top of that. Now, you could actually add a couple more layers to this. This is just going to give the lights as well as our die cut rocket, ship, and stars a little bit of space. There is a little bit of bowing on the screen, so that's why if you could add a couple more layers, that would be totally fine. It doesn't interact or interfere with the card in any way, having that little bow in that screen. But I do want to give it a little bit of extra room so that we don't have anything warping. Once I have that, I set that to the side so that can be drying while I'm assembling the rest of this base here. I put the front ledge there on foam pop dots just like the last 2 cards. Then I put that screen background there and then our top of our arcade here. I add the buttons to the front, and I actually do add the knobs as well, but then take them off later on, realizing that they're just in the way until we have the front of our screen down. So I do put them on there, but I recommend waiting until after the whole card is assembled. That way you don't have something that's in the way. You can put the little bases to those knobs on there. That's not going to be in the way, but the ones that are sticking up from that ledge, those end up being in the way. So I would recommend not doing this step until you have the screen on, and you can't put the screen on until you have the lights assembled. So for this one here, I'm using that wax tool. It makes it a lot easier for putting those little tiny pieces down. Makes it really easy to pick and choose where you want everything to go and just lift them up and put them onto the glue. So I want to put little marks where I want my spaceship as well as my stars to go. So I just used a pen there to mark it, and then I'm going to use my piercer tool in order to pierce a hole. I'm going to pop that light right through there, so it doesn't matter how pretty this light look or the holes look, they're going to be popped right through that galaxy background, and then we're going to have our spaceship and our stars right in front of it, so it's going to be hidden. So I'm using the easy lights here. They come with a battery. The battery case has a plus sign on it, and the battery itself has a plus sign on it. So all you have to do is slip that battery, having those 2 plus signs meet. I regularly test them while I'm creating. I want to make sure that all of the lights are working, that everything is working properly as I'm going. In order to glue it to the base of my machine, I'm just using some Sukwang tape. I have some 1/4-inch Sukwang tape here. Now, before we actually glue it to the back, I'm going to use the Pear Blossom Press Stamp and Die Set to stamp push here on the bottom of the machine. I'm using black ink once again, and I'm stamping it on the Cosmic Sky. In person, you can see it. It's subtle. On the video, you can't really see that there's any words there at all, but I just want to give a directive there. If you want it to be more visible, you could also use white ink or like a more prominent ink. I wanted it to be fairly subtle. Now we're ready to start popping our lights through. So as I'm doing this, I'm checking, making sure that the light is popped through just enough. I don't want it popped through too much. I'm also pressing the button, making sure that it looks how I want it to look. Then I'm using some Best Ever Craft tape to tape those wires in place to make sure they don't move on me. And I'm just reusing the pieces that I used for die cutting. It doesn't need to be a new piece. This is just to hold those wires on the back and make sure that everything stays where I want it to and doesn't move on me. So it doesn't need to be a pretty new piece of tape. We can reuse old pieces of tape as long as it stays where it's supposed to go. So once I have that done, I also put some tape on the back of the wires to make sure that they don't go outside of my little arcade game. In order to put my pieces in place, I'm just using some glossy accents. It's nice and clear, so we're going to be able to see those lights through it. It's going to take just a little bit longer to dry though, because we're working with that mirror sheet and it's non-porous. So we're going to give that a little bit of extra time to dry, but because it's nice and clear, it's going to be nice and secure once everything is totally dried. So I left those there for a few minutes to make sure that that glue starts to set and everything is in place. Then we can add our screen to the front of that arcade game. I'm going to put an acrylic block on it to hold everything in place, to hold it down. Then I'm going to use my shears to trim that top part of the machine. And once again, you could trim the side pieces on the side of the screen if you wanted. I left them there, but you absolutely could trim those if you want them to be inside, if you don't want to see that little strip of the base cardstock beside that. After doing that, I glued down those knobs, let those dry just a little bit, and now we're ready to create our card base for this. So I have a piece of cardstock that is 5.5 inches by 8.5 inches. I'm just going to create a super simple shadow box frame here. I am scoring it at 3 inches, 4 inches, 7 inches, and 8 inches. Once I have them scored, I use the corner of my score pal for folding those score marks, using my bone folder to make sure that we've got a really nice, good crease there. I use that corner just to make sure that everything stays nice and straight. When I fold things down, I make sure that they're even with that left edge. So then I make sure that everything lines up properly. Then we can put our adhesive on there and glue it together. I'm just using that same 1/4 inch Sukwang tape that I had used for gluing down my battery pack on the back of my arcade machine here. Fold everything down, make sure everything lines up, pull the backing off the tape to make sure everything glues together. So here is our card base. We're going to put the arcade game right on top of it. So we're going to see a little tiny bit of the top of the card above that. I don't mind that. If that bothers you, you can cut the card just a little bit shorter. Because our arcade games are darker colors, brighter colors, and our card base is white, it didn't bother me to have a little bit of white showing on the top. Now for the back of our arcade game here, I'm using that double thick foam adhesive. I have them cut in half. I'm putting it all over the backing. We want to do this because that battery pack has some dimension to it, and we want to make sure that everything lines up nice and flat on the front of the card. This adhesive is just a little bit thicker than that battery pack, so we're not going to see a bulge from it on the front of the card. This is just going to make sure everything lines up perfectly and we have some space for that pack there. So once I have that backing off of there, I can put this onto the front of our shadow box. Now this is going to fold nice and flat to go into an envelope. There is a little bit of that ledge peeking out from the outside. Now, because I put some foam tape on there, it has the adhesive from the foam tape. So I'm just using my embossing powder tool to take that sticky off of there so that when we fold this flat, it's not going to stick to the side. Once we have that done, making sure that everything is working properly, our lights are working properly, I'm once again going to add some stickles to the top of that arcade word. I just really liked the look that it gives. I like the extra texture it gives, that extra little bit of sparkle, and I thought it suited the game really nicely. Then I added that stickles to the top of the buttons and knobs. Again, just adding that extra little bit of sparkle. Then we can let that completely dry, and it probably takes, I want to say, about a half an hour for it to dry completely. Here is our finished arcade game. It folds down flat to go into an envelope. You can see the only dimension on the front there is the dimension from that front ledge as well as our battery pack foam adhesive. And I love how it lights up those pieces there. You could also use twinkle lights here if you wanted them to light up kind of randomly and flicker a little bit. I chose to use the easy lights because I thought that was going to work best for the look that I was going for. Then we have our birthday arcade card with that action wobble for the cake on the front. And again, folds down nice and flat. You can easily put it into an envelope. You'll find everything that I've used listed and linked in that description box below. So if there's anything you're wondering about, you'll likely find the information there. Then we have our very first card with the shaker with those bubblegum and electric sparkle stars. I just think they're so cute. I love them. I love the vibrant colors of them and all the different interactive elements. Thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate all the time that you spend with me. I hope you have a fantastic day.